Hi, I'm Bruce Fraser. I'm a professor of philosophy at Indian River State College. The following video clips are designed to give you a rough and ready guide to some basic concepts in logic that you've covered in your textbook. I will go through a series of topics, and you can pick and choose which topics you like in which order. And if you have any additional questions, of course, then those can be the basis for discussion posts and so on. Today, what I'd like to do is talk about arguments, non-arguments, and logic first, to give us a sense of the context that we'll be using to understand the subject matter. We'll talk about structure versus meaning and something called substitution instances, which are very important. And then we'll talk about deduction, validity, and soundness, which will be the focus of our class this term. Okay, let's get some perspective on what we're doing here. Logic is the study of justification. If we take this circle to represent natural language. Okay, this is where we live, so to speak. This includes all sorts of discourse. We tell stories, we try and justify things, we explain things, we engage each other in all sorts of informal ways. Natural language is where we dwell. Well, there are lots of parts of natural language that have nothing to do with argument, but we're interested in that particular area of natural language, which deals with logic, which is the study of justification, how you prove that one claim is true based on evidence. So, there are lots of things, as I said, that are not part of the study of logic, that are not part of arguments. We can put down here arguments alongside logic. Okay, but this is our particular focus, logic and argument. Now, a regular critical thinking class, and there's material in your textbook that deals with critical thinking issues, focuses on the relationships between argument and all these other parts of natural language that we use. This contains, for example, metaphors. How do metaphors shape the reasoning process? That's something that might come up in a critical thinking class. Or storytelling, stories, narratives of certain sorts. How do those tie in with the arguments we give about various topics? Okay, well, the study of logic really takes the structure of justification, and I'll illustrate what that means in just a second. But it takes the structure of justification, the essence of an argument, and it deals with it in the abstract. Logic really is a branch of mathematics. Now, that can be good news or it can be bad news, depending on whether or not you like mathematics. It's very precise, it's very clean. There is a right answer, there is a wrong answer when we're dealing with deductive arguments. We lose that precision and clarity when we're down here dealing with natural language. Okay? Now, there's an analogy that I like to draw. I'm just going to move over to the other board here. There's an analogy that I like to draw between logic and grammar. Okay? All of us should be familiar with the study of grammar. When you study basic declarative sentences, you understand that there's a noun phrase, a verb phrase, and so on. Well, logic really is the underlying grammar of an argument. So, think of arguments as a method of justification. What does that mean? That means you're trying to show something is true. Showing usually a controversial claim is true. Okay? What we're interested in doing is studying the grammar of this method. All right? So, that brings us to this issue of structure. Before I go into structure versus meaning, I do want to dwell a moment longer on this issue of arguments versus non-arguments. One thing we have to keep in mind, and one thing that's explored in your textbook, is this difference between the argument and such things as, let me put V for versus explanation, illustration, reports, and conditional statements. Okay? Arguments are different from these components, and I want to spend just a moment explaining what those differences are. Okay? As I said, an argument is a method of justification, showing something is true. When we explain something, we're not showing something is true. What we're doing is trying to improve a person's understanding of why something is the case. So one of the examples that I use in my class is this. I say to the class, okay, you don't need me to prove to you that you are here in the classroom today. Why? Well, because it's obvious. It's obvious to everybody. What you may need is an explanation of why people are here today. So if I say to you, students are in my class today because they're interested in their education and they want to satisfy the requirements for their degree and so on, then you understand why something is the case. Compare that, or contrast that rather, with this claim, you should, or one should, take a critical thinking class. Now that's not obvious to everybody. And what you need is a justification for that. So argument is about proving something is true. Explanation is about showing why something is the case so that we improve our understanding. All right? Explanation versus argument. Sometimes people confuse illustration with argument. An illustration is a kind of example. It shows us why something or how something is the case, so to speak. So if I give you an account of what an argument is, then one of the things that you may need is an illustration. Here's an illustration of an argument. All whales are mammals. All mammals are warm-blooded. Therefore, all whales are warm-blooded. Here, I have illustrated for you what an argument is. Okay? All right, now a conditional statement. That's different from an argument. Sometimes arguments can be built into conditional statements, but often not. So we don't want to just assume that conditional statements are the same thing as arguments. A conditional statement is an if-then statement. If one thing, call it P, then something else, Q. If, then. If I win the lottery, then I will retire early. What I've done is I've asserted that two things are related in a certain way, but I have not tried to prove to you that they are connected in a certain way. So if I say if one thing, then the other, I'm asserting a relationship. I'm not as yet proving it. So there's a difference. Arguments are about proof and justification. Conditional statements of this form are simple assertions that relate one thing to something else. Okay? So conditional statements are not arguments. All right. So that gives us a sense. Oh, we have one more. This gives us a sense of the difference between argument and logic over there on our little circle, primitive circle diagram, and other parts of speech that are very important but are different from this process, this method of justification. Okay, reports. Language is descriptive. I can tell you that the floor of this particular room is green if you're listening to the audio and you're not actually watching the video. Right? I have told you something about what is the case. I have reported to you a certain circumstance. I have not tried to prove that the floor is green. Okay? I've simply given you additional information. Reports are pieces of information that increase our understanding or knowledge of the way the world is. Okay? They're different from arguments because, again, arguments are about justification, proving something is true. All right. Each of these pieces, if we can move over to the other board for a minute, each of these pieces, explanation, illustration, reports, conditional statements, along with a lot of other stuff, are part of this natural language framework that we live in and we work in. Our focus, again, is on the grammar of this method of justification, or logic. All right? It's very precise, very mathematical, and that's a good thing, as I said, if you like precision in mathematics. If you're math-phobic, then it creates a little bit more of a challenge for you. But in any case, that's the basic context in which we study arguments, argument structure, and so on. Now, with that said, I'll turn to this issue of structure versus meaning.